And for your information, the Mayor is by default a member of every committee of council. And I'm Mark Vincent, who chairs this committee. I'm a councillor for Taharoa.
I'm Hayley Whittington, I'm the General Manager.
My name is Taharoa, I'm Peter Paniota, I'm the one of the way for Kaipara Māori Board Council at first time. Thank you.
And online we have Councillor Ash Nair, the councillor for Wairua. Can't hear you, Ash.
You're on mute, Ash.
Hello.
Or
Good morning. Can you hear me now? I can hear you partly as well, Mr. Chair. It's just the communication is at odds ends. Yeah, good to hear. I can hear parts of what you say. It gets cut off for whatever reason. But thank you. Thank you, everyone. I can't see the faces of anyone in the room. Thank you.
Do we have a camera?
Yeah, that's all. You know, it's just at the room.
Oh, just a laptop camera.
Yeah.
All right. So is that just not quite the right angle, maybe? Or...
It's just very small.
Right. Okay.
Might be something technical at his end.
So I can see Dave West. That's all I can see.
oh, you have to pin the main screen, Ash.
I am okay.
Yeah.
I am
okay.
It says council meetings and there is nothing there. Anyway, Dave, you can see it.
Thank you for your forbearance.
Thank you.
Now, I call for apologies. I'm not aware of any. Does anyone else have any apologies? We have a couple of members who are on their way here but are running late. They're right. Well, I'll just speak very slowly then. Maybe pause for breath. Oh.
It's not proper.
That's a
Amble you take.
You know?
Morena.
We're not too late.
Ai, Ngāti tino tū reiti.
Oh, te kaumā kore. Tēnā koutou.
We are underway, but just having a pause while Rick parks his vehicle. So
Mera se tēnā koutou.
yeah. Yeah, as it happens, we have no apologies, so there is no decision to be made in receiving apologies. And the next item is confirmation of the agenda. This is an extraordinary meeting called for a specific purpose. So I don't see there's any latitude for us to add items to the agenda. But not simply, we are operating in accordance with council standing orders, and that's how we need to go with the flow. So for those who aren't already familiar, we've just been joined by Rick Parori, who is here with Sonny Nesbitt, who just turned up in the last few minutes as well. Meeting is underway, Rick, but we just got past the point of confirming the agenda, and I will move that the Taharoa Domain Governance Committee confirms the agenda for this meeting. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded, Pera. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against?
Aye.
Carried. Thank you.
Now move on to the item.
Conflict of interest declaration, given that we really have only one substantive item on the agenda. Does anyone have a conflict of interest to declare?
No.
See there being none, I will continue on. Now, we have no presentations. That's all right. However, my approach to this is we have an application or request from Fish and Game regarding the release of trout into the Taharoa lakes, and we also have received some advice from DOC. I intend to proceed on the basis that they will be treated as though reporting to council, so I would like to ask each in turn to come and present their information, and firstly with Fish and Game presenting their request, which then gives the opportunity for us as members of the committee to ask questions. And given that, and I know what it's like to be where Ash is on the end of the line, I'm going to allow members of the committee to ask up to 2 questions at a time. And when they've asked their 2 questions, move on to the next, move on to next, move on to next. It doesn't mean you get only 2 questions, but it means that we make sure that everybody gets to ask 2 questions before we move on to the next person, and we'll keep going around till we run out of questions. Okay? So at this point, I will invite the representatives from Fish and Game to come forward to present their request. Just come over here. Do you want to take a seat? You just introduce yourself and then if you would like, I mean, you can assume that we have, be more comfortable sitting, that's fine. Assume that we have read your letter, but you may just wish to emphasise the main points you want to get across. And then, but the main purpose of this is to allow the opportunity for members to ask you questions.
So, morning everyone. My name is Craig Deal. I'm the Regional Manager for the Northern Fish and Game Council, and it's the application that I submitted that this meeting is about today. Firstly, I'd like to express my gratitude for the Governance Committee getting together to consider the application. Very appreciative of that. Really, the application had all the pertinent information in it. There's been a trout fishery in lakes Waikare and Taharoa since 1968 when they were first released. It's probably the most significant fishery north of the Rotorua Lakes. It's regionally significant and it pulls a lot of anglers from over the North Island, Auckland especially. We have evidence of trout, rainbow trout, gambusia and the Dune Lake Galaxid coexisting for over 50 years.
Hey, could I just pause you for a moment? I should have said you've got 5 minutes.
Right. Let me rethink my strategy. It was brought to concern in the 1990s that the trout were potentially a threat to the Dune Lake Galaxid population. Trout do eat the Dune Lake Galaxids, that's been proven, there's no argument about that. But there is a confounding factor of the gambusia. When it was posited that trout were a threat to the Dune Lake Galaxid population, there was a trial to remove trout from Lake Waikare in 1993. And that trial is really the only evidence that we have of the removal of trout from these systems and the impact it will have on the gambusia and Dune Lake Galaxid populations. And I'm sure it's in the reports that have come out in the council agenda minutes, and it's been submitted before, but that trout removal trial did not result in what was expected in an uptick in the Dune Lake Galaxid populations. They remained relatively stagnant in Lake Waikare. There was an increase in juvenile Dune Lake Galaxids, but no corresponding increase in adults. There was a proliferation of gambusia numbers, however, And it was concern of that and the fact that the June Lake galaxids were not increasing, where the scientific recommendation was to put trout back into that system, because there was some population dynamics at play that were not understood. And as a result of that, the recommendation was from the scientists that if you were going to remove trout to benefit the June Lake galaxid population, that there would need to be another management practice taken concurrently on the Gambusia, because the evidence shows that just taking trout out of the system doesn't benefit the galaxid population as expected. So I guess the position for Fish and Game is we would love to be able to reinstate a fishery in the lakes. It doesn't have to be, or there's no expectation that it would be how it was previously. I would like to see the science that has been done, as if anything, it's highlighted the gaps we have in our knowledge, but especially with the population dynamics between Gambusia, the galaxids, and the trout. I would like to work in a collaborative nature to put fish back in the system, trout back in the system, and do monitoring research to better understand it. And I will say this, is that the position of Fish and Game has always been that if trout were proven to be the main factor contributing to the June Lake galaxid decline, that we would support the conservation of the June Lake galaxid over the trout fishery. But at this stage, from our perspective, the science doesn't indicate that. We would like to put trout back in there to bring back the stability of the populations that has existed over the last 50 years and continue with the research. I'm happy to take questions.
Well, I'll to avoid doubt, I'll just go around the table. So, Sonny, would you like to ask any questions of Craig?
Really, I've done my readings and my studies on it. You know, the fact of the matter is that
I'm asking for statements.
yes, no, but a statement requires a question.
No, the thing is, you'll have a chance to make a statement later, okay? At this stage, do you have a question for clarification from Craig?
Does the Fish and Game have any plan for the I don't know, the decline in numbers of Gambusia?
No, Fish and Game doesn't. From what I can understand and talking with Northern Regional Council, I don't think there has been an effective way to control Gambusia that anyone has come up with. Short of rotenone, which it's piscivorous, I can't remember that, it kills fish. So I don't think that's a suitable mechanism for these lakes, because if we're protecting the June Lake galaxid, unless you manage to get enough of them out, harbour them somewhere else, rotenone the lake, and then put them all back in. But that would be a huge effort probably. And at this stage, I'm not aware of any other ways that have been brought about to successfully control Gambusia.
You'll get us another chance. Peter, you have any questions?
I have plenty of questions, but I'll narrow it down to two. The first question that I have is, do you agree that inanga are a taonga under pursuant to the Te Tiriti o Waitangi?
I don't think that's for me to decide. I think that it's for mana whenua to decide. My personally.
Do you agree that inanga are a taonga species pursuant to Te Tiriti o Waitangi?
From a personal perspective, if that was what mana whenua had advised, then I would support that.
I can categorically state that as. Second question that I have is, so you've referred to scientific research as so outdated, you know, 1970s, we're reeling from Cyclone Gabrielle, we're reeling from climate change, we're reeling from what I consider to be an overuse of extraction of water from Taharoa domain. That aside, the scientific research that you've had a look at, have you considered Mātauranga Māori as a research methodology and all of your considerations?
I haven't seen any examples of Mātauranga Māori that would apply to the relationship dynamics between the three species, but I would be more than happy to review it and consider it in my position.
There's definitely some very relevant Mātauranga Māori in there.
Good.
Thank you.
Good. I'll go next to Ash. Ash, do you have any questions for Craig?
Yeah, I have only one. I'm not making a statement at this stage, but I'd like to make one later on. So, Craig, can you just tell me what are the tangible benefits from your point of view and from any other point of view of releasing the trout, apart from what you have mentioned in the letter?
I think the benefits are the fact that it brings people to the region. So there is an economic benefit. I haven't quantified that, but especially considering that the trout fishing or the anglers are more active through the winter. So I know it's a very popular for holidaying and camping at the Kaiwi Lakes through the summertime, but the highest activity through the winter would be for anglers. So I think that's important as an economic benefit to the community to have people coming from outside the region through the winter as well.
Thank you. That's all I wanted to hear. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, Craig. Are you aware that the trout are a threat to the kura population?
I am aware that trout eat kura. I don't know in this system if there has been a documented decline in the kura population as a result of trout introductions.
And also another question. We have been asking for years for baseline data over all of the lakes. We still haven't fully received it.
And your question is? No, that was a statement. What was your question?
You're aware.
Okay.
I will say when there was I am aware there is a lack of baseline data that's being collected, and I think actually there is an opportunity to collect some research. If permission was granted to put trout back in the system in whatever form that may look like, I think the Fish and Game Council would be willing to and enthusiastic about contributing to that research. I personally think it would be wise to do some baseline data collection before making another change to that ecosystem. And I would be advising my council to support that, should the approval to put trout be given.
So what you're saying is quite happy to, if my data is provided for us to consider.
I guess the chance, it depends what you're talking about in terms of baseline data, because if you're talking about baseline without trout in the system, then if the scientific advice from DOC agrees that that's the best way to go forward, then maybe I think that the opportunity for getting baseline data with the dynamics between the three species as it was then has been lost. It probably should have been done before removing trout from the system. But I think if we were to put fish back in there, I think it would be important to get baseline data and continual monitoring supplements trout species, if that was to happen.
Thank you. Rachel.
So if this went to council, the recommendation did, is that there's a year, once you water them, there's a year before you get the trout? Is that
not necessarily? Normally our trout deliveries are done in late May. We pick them up from the Nongataha hatchery. There is a possibility that the hatchery would have spare fish that we could get at short notice, but I haven't explored that. But I know that they can do. Countering that with the effects of Cyclone Gabrielle, if there have been other fisheries around the North Island that have been destroyed, they might be using the spare stock to restock other fisheries. So I can't answer that today about whether we could get trout any time of the year. So the most concrete information I can offer is that we'll be picking up fish in late May, around the 24th of May, and the next guaranteed chance for that will be the same time next year.
we still have a year of collecting data on what's happening to the June Lake Galaxies.
Potentially.
Mayor,
Can you elaborate on my understanding of the situation with the dynamics between the three species? Though the trout and predate on June Lake Galaxies, removal of them hasn't stopped their diminishing numbers. And that may be because of the dynamics between the three species, which is the Gambusia and the June Lake Galaxies, and what the trout makes the behaviour of June Lake Galaxies. Explain to me how it actually works. My understanding in simple terms is the trout makes the Gambusia keep away from the areas that the June Lake Galaxies is required to feed them, and also that the Gambusia is extremely aggressive towards the June Lake Galaxies.
Yes, some of that's confirmed and some of that's theorised. So it was initially thought that the trout were controlling the Gambusia by eating them. When they did trout diet studies, they didn't find evidence of Gambusia in trout stomachs. There's anecdotal evidence from anglers that have seen trout pursuing Gambusia and eating them. But when the studies of trout gut analysis were done, they didn't find Gambusia. They did find galaxids in the trout stomach contents. So what was theorised after that was that trout were performing a function called interactive segregation, where the suppressing effect they were having on the Gambusia was keeping the two populations, the galaxids and the Gambusia, separate. They share the same habitat, so the galaxids exist in the open water during the day and come into the shallow vegetated habitat at night to feed, and it's also where they spawn. Gambusia have been observed attacking galaxids and biting their fins and eyes and immobilising them. So when the trout removal trial in Lake Waikari occurred, there were large numbers of dead galaxids washing up that had been attacked by Gambusia or had their fins removed. And it's also theorised, I don't know if it's been scientifically proven or not, but the Gambusia are likely to be eating galexid eggs when they spawn, because they spawn in the same habitats that the Gambusia inhabit.
My second question is, despite the evidence being contradictory at times, since the trout have now diminished the current system, the June Lake Galaxies are diminishing, or are they increased?
This is for an expert, this answer, this
This has been
question.
the question.
I think it's a fair question. He can. Sorry, he's here to answer questions, so we'll see how he responds.
Knowledge,
Well, the application that Fish and Game made was based on the monitoring data that we'd gotten from the Department of Conservation. It looks like, particularly in Lake Waikari, the galaxid numbers are trending downwards. In Taharoa, they're so low, it's hard to determine a trend. What I think the counter argument to that will be is that the galaxids have a high interseasonal variation, and that maybe it hasn't been long enough for that for a trend to establish itself. But I would say the galaxids are at such low numbers from the start point that it's incredibly risky to take away an equilibrium that's been existing for 50 years.
Just to, if you could refrain yourself, please, Vera. Just to clarify, could you? I'll endeavour not to interrupt you. If you could endeavour not to interrupt me, please.
don't accuse me of having to control myself when the answer is ridiculous.
No, I actually am asking you to control yourself if you consider the answer to be ridiculous. Okay? Even if you consider the answer to be ridiculous. Okay, let's move on. I would like you to relate to us, Craig, just your competency to answer that question. I do think it would be usefully directed to the doc.
I think the doc would have a lot of value to add to that. I have a Bachelor of Science majoring in ecology and zoology, but my main qualification to answer that is just from the notes that I've been reading from the scientific papers that I've got available.
Thank you. I have two questions. Firstly, Is it correct that the frequency of introductions, like in terms of replenishing the stock, is normally an annual thing?
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Now, I will note that there's no natural spawning for fish in the Kaiwi lakes. It's easy to maintain population because it's considered a put and take fishery. So everything that goes in, there's no natural breeding. So it's a little bit easier to manage.
You mentioned there was a trial done in Lake Waikere with removal of trout. Was that just by, like, were they actively removed or just so?
Not releasing, and they conducted netting to remove the population that was already in there.
Oh, just that was by way of introduction to my second question, which was Lake Kaiwi. Were there ever trout in there?
There were trout in Lake Kaiwi. I don't recall when they were introduced in there. Introductions into Lake Kaiwi were ceased in 2001.
Right. Is there anything we can learn from that?
Well, we can make inferences. I think the galaxid population, I think, was surveying last, picked them up in there in the 1990s. What you've got in there now is very high concentrations of gambusia. But there's no June Lake galaxids that have been identified in there since the 1990s.
You couldn't draw, this is just by way of clarification. So then you wouldn't draw a conclusion from that then that the cessation of the trout being there was responsible for the galaxids also disappearing. There isn't that same causal relation. Like if say the galaxids had been seen up to that point, and then the trout were removed, and then the galaxids disappeared, you could conclude from that dynamic of the three main species had been.
You could potentially conclude that, but I think there's probably too much time separation between the two to make a scientific conclusion.
I'll just go around the table again.
Questions, a few questions.
Pick it two.
The first question is that we've got a lot of evidence that is presumptuous evidence, and a lot of evidence that is actual visual evidence in regards to the sampling regime. Would you agree that both the inanga, both the June Lake DLG and the companies that follow occupy the same space?
Yes, they do.
Would you agree that Kaiwi Lakes is too small to have a population of trout that predates on DLG? Especially given the numbers.
Well, the lakes have proven to be able to support trout in the past. I think, with the fact that they're released, you can control trout numbers. So I think releasing lower numbers, if permission was to be given, I think releasing low numbers of trout in the first instance would be the way to go.
Thanks for that. And my last question is, with 4 dot sampling they've done, and I just have to state that it hasn't been bought for this board until just now. So you've got it before we got it. Would you agree?
I'm not sure.
Okay. So the evidence you're requesting return of the trout is based on the interaction between trout and the guppies.
Yes.
It's purely based on that.
I think it's based on the interaction between the three species. I think if you take one species out of that equation, it changes the dynamic, and I don't think the dynamic's been well researched enough to be conclusive.
Okay, would you agree that when you released 10,000 trout in 19, what was it, 68. And then a year later, you released another 5,000. And for each trout, possibly one adult is taken out and eaten, maybe on a daily basis. So would you agree that predating only, the DLG, that each and every one that's each one is worse than them fighting for themselves and disappearing? So the reality is that they are able to adapt, but they can't adapt to predators that eat them. So they may be able to adapt to the guppies, but they can't. They just can't compete with the numbers, and it's all about kai. Would you agree?
I can only speculate on which is worse. I would say that releasing 10,000, I think that was far too many trout to release. It would, I mean, if you look at it compared to recent years, the latest releases were 300 in Waikato and about 2,000 in Taharoa, and it had been like that for the last 15 years or so. I think putting that many in the system was overly ambitious and way too many, and that definitely contributed to the decline in June Lake galaxids in the first instance. I do think that the June Lake galaxids could support a smaller trout population without suffering. It's been shown to happen in other similar systems. I can only speculate on which is worse for the galaxids, the trout or the gambusia, but I feel like from what I have read that if the gambusia are eating galaxid eggs and competing for habitat, then I think they are the worst for the galaxid population.
Do you think that the trout could be eating the eggs too?
I think they're probably too small for trout to identify.
That,
I think you had your two questions a few questions ago. You get another go.
look, I've got 100 questions.
Book this out. Peter, would you like to ask a couple of questions?
Yes, I would. Thank you. The first question that I have is, would you agree that your primary purpose and motivation in standing here today to make your presentation is the introduction of trout, and therefore your focus is on showing a lot of the advantages of releasing trout into the system? Is there going to be an equal citation for the from this side or not?
Good question.
Anyway, carrying on, that your primary motivation is to introduce the trout into the system, so you're only looking at and shining a light on the advantages and then minimising the disadvantages of the introduction of a natural species into an environment that's already in degradation.
There's no question that as fish and game, it's in our interest to have a trout fishery in the Kaiwi Lakes. However, I will say it was always the position of the Northern Fish and Game Council that if trout were proven to be the main degradation to the galaxid population, that we would voluntarily prioritise conservation of the June Lake galaxid over the trout fishery.
Okay, so the second question that I have is that you made a statement, changes the dynamic if you take one species out of the ecosystem. So that was when you were referring to the triangular nature of the three of them. So you said if you take one species out of the ecosystem, it changes the dynamic. You talked about 50 years, which how people have been here for generations, and there's ample mātauranga Māori, etc. and so forth, that would just, from me personally, is preposterous to focus on a 50-year period. So the question that I have is, are you aware of Lake Ngatu in Awanui, which, according to McDowell, states that despite the presence of an abundant mosquito fish population for 70 years, the inanga population of this lake seems to be thriving. That's a lake where no trout have ever been introduced. Are you aware of that? And how can you explain the dynamic of somehow the trout being the saving grace and having to control inanga when trout are not present in that lake and they're thriving?
I am aware of Lake Ngatu. I wasn't aware of the situation that you've described.
That's in some independent literature, not taken from, one sector of one section of the, stakeholders. It's a very independent literature review based on scientific evidence that says that Lake Ngātu should be used as a check on what can be the potential for Taharoa domain, because it's a dune lake, it's in Northland, the whakapapa, which is really important from a Mātauranga Māori perspective in terms of the species being from this area, would be a good indicator of, or a good case study of why it's not within the best interest of our tanga species, which is protected and guaranteed under Te Tiriti o Waitangi, from being further degraded by an introduction of a species that has no whakapapa correlation to Taharoa domain, for, again, the advantages of people to come here for their recreational purposes and then go off to back to their kāinga. The same thing, we're in this situation because human beings introduced a mosquito fish for again, advantages for people to come camping so that they were not attacked by mosquitoes. And now we're in a situation where we've got, again, an unnatural species that does not whakapapa to the lake, and where we've learnt, so the lessons of the past teach us that introducing something unnatural to the environment for the advantage of people doesn't work. It disrupts the equilibrium. So you're coming here today to tell us to introduce something further that's unnatural to then assist with the management of another unnatural species. So what happens when my people, our people, are sitting here in 100 years' time with someone sitting up here telling us to introduce something else that's unnatural into the environment?
So that was the question?
And a statement. Thank you.
So, okay. What is it that you would like?
Moving right along.
No. What is the question that you?
Say.
What is the question you would like Craig to answer?
Do you understand that from a generational perspective? And do you understand that from a generational perspective? And what is your whakaaro or your thoughts on that position, or rather a statement?
I really don't know where to start, to be honest. There's a lot to take in. I acknowledge what you've said. Is there anything in particular you want me to focus on with my response to that? You want me to respond to the Lake Ngātu situation?
To the Lake Ngātu situation, and using that as an
indication of what might happen at the lake.
Yeah, or why inanga are thriving there, why they're not thriving in Lake Taharoa, and whether the absence of trout are whether the abundance of inanga have any correlation to the lack of trout in that lake, whether that's having an effect on.
Well, I guess that from what I've read is that every system, especially a closed system like a lake, they have their own peculiarities. And I mean, there are other documented examples from the people that did the science where they've introduced galaxids into a lake that had trout in it, and the galaxids have thrived as well in that case. So I mean, they even said that it's hard to compare the Kaiwi lakes, say Lake Waikari and Taharoa, with each other, because they're even though they're right next to each other, they're very different. So I think the ecology of each waterway or water body has its own peculiarities, and you have to do the research on that to find out what the causes and effects are. So I think it's great that the inanga can thrive in Lake Ngātu in the presence of Gambusia. That's a ray of hope, I guess, that it can happen in other systems. In the Kaiwi lakes, there's obviously some dynamics that might be a little bit different to that, maybe.
One is what you mentioned, which was the competing for the environment.
In the Kaiwi lakes.
That was what you mentioned in your answer, was that they compete for habitat. So the introduction of further trout would further exacerbate the competition for the habitat. So that's another negative on.
I'm not quite sure it works like that. I think
I mean, it works. So you put 100 people into this room.
Can I just clarify? We're here to ask questions for clarification, not for you to talk over the top of him when he is answering your question.
Thank you.
Give him the opportunity to answer the question.
I guess it's an unlimited environment that would naturally.
Would like to have him to have the opportunity to answer your question, rather than you make.
He did. He did.
Answered your question, jolly good. I think you've had yours turn for now. We'll move on around the table. We're not finished.
Well, it's very formal today.
I think we need to be. Process is our friend. Rick, would you have any further questions?
Yes, a couple of questions, Craig. What professed Fish and Game to introduce 10,000 trout at any one time?
I can't answer that question. It was the Acclimatisation Society back in those days, and I think there was a much higher importance on trout fisheries placed than on the natural environment. That viewpoint is different today. I don't know. We do have a calculation that can indicate the suitability of a habitat for how many trout you're supposed to release, but like I've said, the ecology of each system is different, so it's only a very rough guide. I guess with this system, we've got a history of releases, and you can compare fish condition to your release numbers to see if you're releasing too much. I don't know how they came up with the figure to release 10,000. I think it was far too high, and I think the fact that we're releasing 2,000 annually prior to when the releases were ceased is an indicator that it was much too high for the carrying capacity of that environment.
How many lakes or rivers or waterway are trout in the north?
I don't know the exact number of waterways. I mean, there'll be historical releases in almost all of them, probably. I don't have them documented, but I do know the acclimatisation societies were very ambitious with releasing trout. They don't survive in the rivers up here very well at all because of temperature, and they get very low over a dry summer. We have, other than the Kaiwi Lakes, we have 3 stocked fisheries, which are irrigation dams. There's Wilson's Dam at Ruakaka, Faux Valley in Whangarei, and Lake Manuwai outside of Kirikiri are our only 3 stocked fisheries.
Rachel.
Yeah, I just, looking at these graphs, obviously you can see noticeable decline from 2019. When
Can I just clarify that? Are you referring to the doc survey there?
the graph that's on the letter.
Okay, carry on.
Would it be feasible to perhaps, rather than releasing trout into both lakes, release into one as a controlled experiment, or whatever you call it, as a study, rather than releasing into both of them and putting pressure on both of those environments?
Certainly a viable option if there was some research that people would like to commit to. If that was the case, Fish and Game would support the research for that.
So, despite the fact that the trout are no longer in the lake, we want to release. Current indication is that June the lakes is disappearing slowly. And it's your opinion that if the trout are reintroduced, they have a better chance of maintaining a population?
So you put testing that proposition. That's your question. Is that?
Yes, I want. Do you agree?
That is what the evidence from the previous trout removal trial suggests.
It's,
Oh, the
it's,
Quiet, please, in the audience.
The monitoring by the Department of Conservation shows a declining trend in Lake Waikare. I don't think it's a stretch. I mean, the reporting is from these scientists is relatively clear.
Is that your answer?
It's my answer.
Thank you. Any second question? Okay. I've overlooked Ash. You want to come in, Ash? Have you got any further questions?
No, I would just like to make a statement when asked. Thank you.
Okay, we'll get round to that eventually. Okay, actually, I'll start again from this side. Peter, do you have some more questions?
Do I have some more questions?
You're allowed two more.
Just take a second.
Okay, well, perhaps I'll pass on to Sonny in the meantime.
Oh, look, I'll go right back to the first release and the actual hit that the lake would have taken from that many trout being released. And the recovery ever since has not been great, simply because the predation and the addition of the guppies or the gambusia. So I still come back to the fish and game, just trying to look at the correlation between trout and gambusia.
Is that the question? Is fish and game just looking at that correlation?
Yeah.
I think fish and game looks at the dynamics between the three species. I think there's more going on than.
So
That's your answer?
I think the basis of the application that Fish and Game made was around the dynamics of the three species and the science that's been done on the dynamics between the three species, the guppies, the trout, and the June Lake galexids, and how they interact.
The actual scientific evidence is not prevalent, is it?
I don't think it's conclusive on what effect the trout have on the guppies. The theory is that they perform some sort of segregation function, but it hasn't been proven scientifically.
So Peter just gave an example, and I know that example too, Lake Ngāti. But the reality is that different species of galaxis, because this is only lake in the world that has this species of June Lake galaxis, and you're aware of that, aren't you?
Thank you, Sonny. That did come to a question. That's good. Your two questions?
I did have another question.
We'll go, and then because we've got to get to the end of this.
So, would you, if you were to be able to release trout again, what sort of numbers would you be looking at?
I think I would like to come to that conclusion in collaboration with some of the other stakeholders. I don't see the Fish and Game Council just coming up with that decision themselves.
Thank you. Peter.
Yeah, thank you for the chair. So the first question that I have, and so I just need if you'll allow me to step into the question.
Put the watch on it.
Thank you. So there was a data collection in 1998, and it showed that a large number of gambusia in the summer of 1997 and 1998 followed removal of trout from Waikato, which is what you've referred to numerous times. However, a parallel increase in gambusia also occurred in Lake Taharoa, where trout had not been removed. The summer of 1997 and 1998 was the warmest in Northland since records began as a result of the largest El Nino event on record. And it is possible that unusually high summer water temperatures may have played some role in observed mass mortalities of dwarf inanga and the abundance of gambusia. So that flies in the face of what you've said here this morning. Can you respond to that. Independent data collection.
So my response to that is, then that may have been the case. The report that was written by David Rowe, the scientist, indicated that the trout removal was a factor that played into that. The summer temperatures may have also been a factor that played into that.
I'm talking about, so you referred to the other lake where trout wasn't removed. Sorry, you've been referring to the lake where trout were removed in the increase in numbers. However, the other lake where trout were introduced,
They remained.
so the rates increased in both lakes irrespective of the trout. So you've attributed that to the trouts, still to the trout being removed, whereas he attributes it to just the higher climate conditions that year.
My response to that is the evidence obviously supports what you're saying has happened. The other thing to consider is that if trout were playing a role in separating the Gambusia and the Galaxids, then if there weren't trout in the system, then the higher number of Gambusia may result in higher mortality of Galaxids.
The second question that I have is that the role of trout predation on controlling mosquito fish numbers is not supported by any data, and recent analysis of trout gut contents from the Kaiwi Lake showed no predation on mosquito fish. Adult trout were mostly feeding on koda, crabs, inanga, and woolies. So, and you've talked about in the past, they've kept an equilibrium while we're in a different point in time with different challenges and concerns. Why would we, again, going back to a taonga species, to Māori, to mana whenua, tangata whenua, why would we further exacerbate the decline of the taonga when it primarily feeds on all of our other native species? And what I'm hearing today is that they may use this effect where they essentially create a barrier, where they're dividing them. However, ultimately feed on the taonga species and compete for the habitat of our taonga species.
So what was the question?
So the question was, why would we want to further make it more difficult for our taonga species survival rates by introducing a predator that's going to not only eat them, eat other species that they need to eat, and compete for their habitat?
I guess you're asking me to speculate a little bit, but I think if
You've been speculating this whole time.
If the committee decided that putting trout back in the system, well, if the committee decided that it was in the best interest of the Galaxid to have trout in the system while there's Gambusia in there, at the potential risk to the other taonga species, then that's the committee's decision.
Thank you. I'll move right along. I'm going to round this up shortly and ask for the DOC representative to make themselves available to be questioned. Rick, do you have any further questions? Get to the end of this stage of proceedings.
If there was a trout release to be done, how would they go about fishing? There's no powerboats. Are they going to use alternative, or will they fish from the banks?
There's a lot. Shoreline fishing was very popular in the lakes before the fishery died out. I'm not sure, is there no power boats on any of the lakes now, or I thought they were still allowed on Taharoa?
That'd be correct.
But I mean, the point is shoreline fishing was very popular when boating was allowed as well. So I can defer to Peter, who's an experienced angler of the Kaiwi Lakes, might be able to add more to that statement.
There's power boats on the main lake, but that's the lake where we wouldn't want to test, like if we're looking at testing, having one lake where we do reintroduce them, it would be the other lake.
Oh, Taharoa, like that, yes.
It's not happening all morning. How come I get breaches and he doesn't?
Excuse me, Alan, why is this?
I've indulged that.
Everyone's been speaking.
I actually agree.
Everyone's been speaking. It wasn't just me.
What else?
So where the power boats are allowed is where we wouldn't want to introduce the trout because that's where the inanga are at critical levels. But whereas the other lake, where we would, like Waikare, where we would introduce them, there's no power boats allowed.
So is the question, is it worth having a fishery if people can only fish from the shore? Is that?
I was just asking what the plans of Fish and Game were. If you
I would just be to, as far as fishing concerns, it behoves us to create maximum responsibility for the anglers. But it depends on whether there was a monitoring program or not. We may need to pay a little bit more attention to catch and stomach contents and things like that, depending on what sort of monitoring was occurring. But fishing game perspective, it would be allowing maximum opportunity for fishing if there was a fishery to be established.
next question. So even after this meeting today, the plan is to return with numbers somewhere between 300 and 10,000 for approval.
I don't think there's a preconceived number. I would be advising my council who make the decisions for Northern Fish and Game, but I think if the approval was given to put fish back in there, I think it would. I think the number released would have to be agreed to between some of the other stakeholders. I don't think it would be just in the best interest of Fish and Game to come up with those figures themselves. I would like to see a collaborative thought to it.
Okay. Thank you.
Rachel, did you have another question?
Yeah, can you just confirm to me that I see in your second to last paragraph on page 5, you've noted that trout were already removed from Lake Kaiwi. It has high populations from Gambusia, but the June Lake Galaxis has still not moved back in, is that correct?
Well, theoretically, they could reoccupy it through the channel between Lake Taharoa and Lake Kaiwi, but they haven't. I don't have any explanation for why they haven't.
And also it's been observed in that lake where the June Lake Galaxis is no longer there and the trout are no longer there, that also the population has been diminishing as well.
Where did you get any birds from?
It's in the second to last paragraph on page 5 here.
I would assume the tuna population is decreasing because they move.
Okay, you are correct to suggest that the Gambusia population might be a threat to the Kura.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So is there a question there, Craig? You want?
I just wanted to confirm that that was the case.
So anecdotally, there's low numbers of kuta in Lake Kaiwi. There's a proliferation of Gambusia in the lake. There's no scientific evidence to support that theory.
Thank you. Look, I think that because I haven't got any further questions, we've got to the point where we've exhausted this part of the meeting, and I'd like now to have the opportunity to for members to ask questions of the DOC representative, if she would if you would like to step down now, please, Craig.
I'd like to thank the committee for their consideration.
Is Dave online?
Dave is online.
Oh, yeah. You wanted just to add in?
Sure. So perhaps this is a way of an introduction. I'm Rolene Elliott. I'm the Regional Issues Manager for Department of Conservation for Te Taharoa. And Ruben here.
Ruben Booth, Senior Ranger Biodiversity here at the County Coast Office. Yeah.
And we have Dave West online. So he's our freshwater science advisor. And I'm hearing the sorts of questions I feel perhaps Dave would probably be the best person to answer your questions, but if we sit here and there's something relevant to us.
Yeah, definitely. What I could open up with a couple of things from me if you'd like, or you can go straight to Dave for what you prefer.
If you want to open things up, just bearing in mind, we do have a 5-minute time limit on.
Oh, yeah. We'll go straight to Dave then.
Dave, would you like to unburden yourself with some information for us, please, on this issue?
Yeah, I didn't necessarily come prepared to be an advocate for the Dune Lake Galaxis, and I don't think it's appropriate for me or us to be that. So it'll be.
It's more just if you could think of the information that the doc has provided, and then we'll have the opportunity to ask the one or other of you.
Okay. So the information that's been provided, which is an update on what was provided to the committee in 2019 around the DLG numbers seen in the Spotlight Transx. So that has been presented before by Tom Drennan, and he did that update. So those graphs that you've been provided with are the ones that he did. So that initial work was actually a review of the methods. So the spotlighting method was not, none of us were particularly happy with it. So I just want to highlight that that method is not the preferred method, but it's the one that's been used. So hence that review. The other observation on the 2000 or the most recent spotlighting is that it's been impacted by low lake levels. It relies on the littoral margin being able to be walked by a person with a spotlight. So when there's no littoral margin and you go straight into the drop off, you can't actually effectively use the method. So that's an observation. And even it's only the sandy shores. They never actually managed to do the reedy margins. So it's, which is one of the reasons we wanted to review the method. We haven't come up with anything better yet or implemented it. I suppose the other things of relevance to the committee is that there's been other things happening in the lake. And I think I just emphasise that the lakes are a dynamic ecosystem and there's lots of other stuff going on. And the Dune Lake Galaxias aren't just being affected by the trout or their absence or the gambusia or their numbers. So there's actually been some GLGs found washed up dead. We went and had a look at the lake and picked up 20 fish that were freshly dead and washed up on the shore round by the campground, and they weren't fin nipped. They looked really healthy, so it was quite an unusual event for me. And then the regional council have reported, they didn't give an exact number, but thousands of dead fish. So yeah, there's other things going on. That's main emphasis there. And then there's also the lake level. Taharoa's levels, as everybody knows, are really low, and the regional council did a report on that. So hopefully the board has seen a copy of that. So there's also I haven't actually seen the report yet, but NRC commissioned Lake Spy on the lakes, which is lakes submerged plant indice. So they've just finished that survey, and the results for the plant communities are not good. I don't want to use words like collapse, but certainly the previously seen beds of macrophytes, charophytes are almost absent. So anyway, main point there, other things going on. The three lakes are different, as people have already said. Lake Kaiwi is a very different lake. And actually in the lake level thing, this seems to be different as well. Yeah. They're not all responding or not all going low. So I think we need to be very careful extrapolating from one lake to another. So those are some general statements, context. I can talk to questions about the science. I don't think the science is black and white. I think the only thing that Fish and Game and I would agree with, this is personally my opinion as a scientist, is that trout eat dune lakes galaxius. So yeah, I think everything else is not clear, and the science is patchy, and a lot of it's not peer reviewed as well. That's the other thing. As a scientist, when you're making quite a strong statement, that should actually go through a peer review process, and the literature is not peer reviewed. Okay, I'll stop there. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you for that. And I presume that amongst you and your colleagues, you'll sort out who answers the questions rather than you're feeling the need to answer a question. And I'll start on my right here with Sonny. Would you like to ask?
Kia ora, Dave. Thanks for being available. It's very important that we understand the sampling methods and their percentage of tika, or how true and how puno they are in regards to the availability of the fish in that area, levels and so forth. So my question is, the ones that you found or that have been found, were they adults or were they definitely nipped by the gambusia, or were they as a result of a propeller, perhaps?
The ones that I've observed myself were almost all adults, or I would have called them adults, and there was no physical damage on them that I could see. So whether it be fin nipping or propeller damage, I couldn't see any evidence of that. It was quite unusual to me. I did give them to Tanya Cook and Alex to look at, so they could take the oddless out and make the most of the opportunity, but they also didn't find any real smoking gun. So, and I unfortunately I don't know whether I only became aware of the regional council finding the dead fish after the fact, so never actually got to see those fish. So yeah, sorry, this is and the spotlighting method is you occasionally, it's mostly targeted for adults. They don't the larvae are really hard to see, and at different times of years probably, so it's targeting the numbers of adults. Yeah.
Thanks, Dave. That's my initial response. First and foremost.
Yeah,
next.
I have a burning question. It was your opening statement where you said that you don't purport to represent the Dune Lake galaxies. So who represents our taonga species? Is it Northland Regional Council who's taking an active? We've heard about every other species.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. I was just mainly talking about what I'm presenting today and how I'm presenting to the committee.
No, so the question is who represents our taonga species actively.
Yeah, so sorry, I was just clarifying. So the Department of Conservation has a role to look after Indigenous species. And as in the letter that has been supplied, how we do that and how we proportion effort against the myriad of species that are threatened is subject to process, etc. And the species being described as a species. So it should be us. I would say that Dune Lakes galaxius is a species that isn't well catered for by the systems we have. It's not, as I said, it's I'll leave it there. It should be but under the MPA National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management, the 2020 version, Northland Regional Council and all regional councils around the country and unitary authorities have a responsibility for Indigenous species as well. So it's no longer just us. So, but yeah.
Thank you.
The second question that I have is, so it seems like when they're fine as juveniles, but then when they get into their adult years for reasons unknown or contradictory reasons, there's mass killings or mass deaths, which could potentially be, due to even a lack of food source. But have one possible answer to that question might be whether the same mass drownings or killings or deaths have been observed at Lake Waikare recently, since the boats have not been able to go on that lake, to see whether there's a correlation with those.
Yeah, okay. So if I interpreted your question correctly, you're asking, is there any evidence for boat activity being a cause of the deaths that we've seen? Is that clear? Is that what your question is?
Yeah, and by using Lake Waikare, which doesn't have boats on it, as to whether there's been any observations of the same mass killings or deaths.
That's, not that I'm aware of, unless Ruben can chip in. And again, unfortunately, I haven't seen the full details of the regional council's reporting of the deaths that they've seen. So, yeah, it's a good question.
Quite important. It seems quite important because there's a divergence for obvious reasons between Fish and Game and others as to why the killings or whatever term we want to use mortalities, why they're occurring in the adulthood, because it seems like they're fine as juveniles even in the presence of trout. It's where they get to the adult, past their juvenile stages, that there seem to be the declines and the deaths. So that for me would seem like a critical part of the data collection exercise.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have the data to answer it. I think we could talk to locals.
That's the point. So we keep on going around in circles. Who's getting the data when, so we can arrive at a decision? Is it who's responsible?
I agree.
For the
so
data?
just one point though. We've got no evidence that of juvenile June Lake Scalaxius not being impacted by trout. In fact, the larvae, and we wouldn't necessarily see the mass mortality of larvae or small, or they're so small, and that so yeah, there's no, just be careful that there could be other mortalities, mass mortalities that we're missing. So just sorry, carry on.
It's your two.
That wasn't the answer to the question though. So the question is who is collecting the data and who's responsible for it, who's funding it, because we seem like we're going around in circles. And
I think isn't that an agreement that was made a couple of years ago?
Well, I wasn't here.
Nor was I, but I think it's on the record that there was Dave, would you be able to clarify that for us? Because I thought that was either DOC or the regional council was going to be doing the work to come back with a specific answer.
I think the undertaking was that there would be a group that would answer questions from the governance committee. I would say that, I mean, I wouldn't even know how to collect how many boats there are on either of the lakes, so I think there's a limit to what the department can or should collect. We've tried to do the best we can on getting number counts of the June Lake Scalaxius. So there's so I think I would make an observation that the department can answer some questions. We can't, but there's some we can't. So I think the who answers those questions is a good prompt and challenge. I would look to other members of the community and managers of the lake to who is best to answer those questions.
So it's sort of a reverse game of musical chairs. Yeah, okay, thank you for that. I think there was a some sort of a working group, a scientific working group that Doc was heading up in that regard.
Yeah, so there's a Dune Lakes Galaxid science group, which
Yes.
we've met 2 or 3 times to look at the science around the status and the ecology of Dune Lakes Galaxis. So our focus was on actually trying to collate what we know about the Dune Lakes Galaxis, and so I think we were trying to stick to our knitting, to be fair, which is thinking about the species in question.
I think you might have had your 2 questions there, Peter, for now.
Yeah, and so did you just then.
I was just seeking clarification there.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, so that was my first question, was regarding the status of this reference group or the research group, and it seems like that's at a stage of being inconclusive and no clear outcome in sight. With the information that we have from the surveys that were carried out, it looks to me as a layperson, there's a trend line starting from about 4 years ago of decline, recognising the misgivings you have about the method of collecting those data. The trend line is down, and I just was wondering, because the numbers are so low, whereabouts is the margin for error in relation to those results?
Well, it's high. There's high. I mean, I think we'd struggle to put standard errors around that, but that fitted line is the best that the stats can do. I do find it, we're seeing, 20, 30 fish maximum, maybe even less in Taharoa, but then we walk along a beach and we pick up 20 adults, and then we hear reports of 1,000 dead adults out of, I presume it's Taharoa. So there's also anecdotal reports from fishers of seeing shoals of fish on their sounders, of small fish, which were unlikely to be gambusia because they're benthic and the larvae are too small to really be picked up on domestic sounders. So I personally feel that the low numbers that we're seeing are at odds with how many are in the lake.
Right, so then, against the clarification, how much can we rely upon that survey information?
Not very much, I would. So which is why we did the review in 2019 to think about how we could collect more consistent and less variable data.
Okay. So could I summarise that as saying it's interesting but not very useful?
Well, in the absence, any data is useful in the absence. And so it was and it's something we've been doing for some years. So we also talked about if we did change the method, we'd have to do the same old method as you do the new method. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'll move on now to further around the table. Mayor Craig?
Okay, I've just 2 questions here. When we want to look at the background, the first one, going back to the Taharoa and the main management plan in 2016, the objectives most relevant to the inquiry is to stop the release of exotic fish by 2018 in Lakes Taharoa and Waikari, to consider re-releasing trout and native species numbers to see decline or absence. Just looking at the commonality between yourselves and Fish and Game. So do you agree with Fish and Game that the species is in decline since the removal, despite the removal of the trout?
The evidence we've got says they're continuing to decline.
Okay, thank you. Second question relates to, do you also accept that the gambusia threatens the breeding habitat of the Dune Lake Galaxis, And that they also predate on the edge of the June Lake collectors, and the numbers of gambusia increased in all the lakes.
There's 3 questions there. Well, first off about the June Lakes collectors spawning areas. We don't know where they spawn. We've been looking. We haven't found out where they spawn. So as to the extrapolation that then gambusia would then eat their eggs, becomes even more confounded. As to the numbers of gambusia increasing in all the lakes, we haven't been monitoring gambusia numbers. They are a very, the numbers explode over summer and then decline over winter, and then, so there's, yeah, that'd be even harder than June Lakes collector to monitor, and we haven't got the numbers to say they are still increasing. One assumes there's a limit to how many of themselves they can pack into a lake.
Rachel, you have a question?
I just wondered, would DOC see any benefit in releasing a smaller amount of trout into one of the lakes as a case study to get some further data on the interactions and if it would actually help? Or are you saying that we just do the status quo and we don't try anything and see where it goes from there?
So and I heard Craig say this as well, to actually know whether it makes a difference or not, you need some before or baseline data. So, and I think we've seen that our spotlighting data is not good enough to be, well, as it's currently applied, to be the before data, and you would also need other stuff too. So yeah, I would only consider it if we had a good enough set of data to see the effect, and it's confounded as well because we've now the trout haven't been there since 2 or 3 years, and we're actually unsure how many are still in there. Like, they can live longer than 3 years. I don't know how many have been caught by anglers. I'm not convinced there's not still some trout in those lakes that are actually having some effect, whether it be good or bad.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Rick, and I haven't forgotten you, Ash, either.
Sure, Dave, Rick Priori. Good to talk to you finally, sir. You mentioned that trout eat ELG, fact.
Correct.
So 10,000 trout, it would be a massacre, wouldn't it? For every year they were in.
Yeah, although there are records that Fish and Game have of their trout releases, and I don't know. None of the records I have, which go back to 1987, and the first 2 years in 87 and 88, they released 4,000 into Taharoa. So that's the biggest number I can see on it. And since probably the 2000s, it's been, as Craig said, stabilized around 2,000 pretty much, plus or minus. So yeah, but yes, sorry, answering your question, yes, 10,000 trout in Taharoa would had a massive effect on, any fish in there, like kura, as people said, and bullies, etc. Yeah.
Thanks, Dave.
Is it second question? Okay. Ash, would you like to ask a question?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I would love to ask a question to Dave. I feel like a coroner investigating a death which has not been committed yet. Dave, and I before I ask the question, I congratulate you in saying and admitting that you have done research with confounding results and saying that there is no conclusive evidence. Is it the case?
Yeah, except for the one fact that I think we can agree on, that trout eat June Lakes glaxes. I think nobody's arguing that, but everything else, well, to varying extents, would be a matter of disagreement between different people.
Okay, so being very conscious of the ratepayers' money, and I would like to have some limit on the amount of money we spent on research. What's your recommendations? Should we keep going on that way, or should we rather introduce a manageable amount of fish and then get the real data rather than inconclusive research?
Well, without a significant investment in monitoring before you reintroduce trout, I don't think we can get conclusive data. So I think there's a, I also think of the things you can do for the lakes, one of the things that some people is not put another species into it. It is an exotic species in it. So I think so I think the going from the things that we do agree on, that trout eat DLG, I would be, my personal advice would be that's the only real clear. The weight of evidence for me, as my personal opinion, is that I would not put trout back in.
You would not?
No.
Okay. Well, that's opposite of what you said earlier on. Is I think there is, but anyway.
So sorry, just to clarify. So the science. So there's a weight of evidence in any science. So I felt I was being asked as a scientist my opinion on that, my understanding of the science, both pro and con, and etc. And so yeah. So if that wasn't the question, then yeah. Yeah, so I'm sorry, I'm just unclear. I'm sorry. Please restate your question, then, if I've.
So, okay, it's just really a one question and not the second question. All I was trying to say that question is very easy. How much money you would like to spend as a ratepayer on the amount of research rather than introducing a manageable amount of fish to get the data, real-time data, rather than inconclusive research? That was my question.
Okay. So it's time and money.
As you're thinking, I might ask another question, which Craig said: do they breed themselves or do they die? Do they keep breeding? If you introduce 300, we will end up with 10,000 trout.
No, Craig, no. As far as Craig said this as well, there's no evidence of spawning in the lake. So and they have a limited life. But they can live a lot longer than 3 years, I will say. So.
So Dave, you can answer my first question. What is stopping you from doing this? Yeah.
I suppose to spend the ratepayers' money well, I would want to be sure that I can give them some conclusive evidence of pros and cons or effect of, and I can't think of a way to design the study to get a baseline to actually be able to give them conclusive evidence. And I would also say you're actually experimenting with a lake, so it's I personally anyway, okay, I wouldn't spend the money.
Thank you, Chair.
So you wouldn't spend money
on the proposal in front of me that I heard was that a limited release of trout with some collection of data. Would I support that premise or proposal? And
yes,
or would I spend ratepayers' money, as it were, to collect the required baseline data? And my answer is no.
Okay, so your answer is no, you would not support a limited release of trout, or no, you would not support ratepayer money being spent on further.
Well, the two are contingent, but so the spending money to collect baseline data of before and after some said proposed release of some number of trout, yeah, I wouldn't. I don't think you could get conclusive evidence that the trout are causing trout June lake collectors decline, or preventing Gambusia from causing a June lake collector decline.
Thank you, Chair. That answers my question. Thank you for that. Cheers. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, round the table again.
Dave, I know that there's the 3 species that are, or 4 species that are living in there, five, and also all the plankton and all the other food. So,
Actually, can I just push for a moment? I do want to get this to a conclusion, so make this for everybody. Last two questions.
that took all of 20 seconds.
Oh,
Now I'm going to ask the question.
yeah, sure. Yeah, I just wanted to say, I'll just try and.
You know, how can I ask the question if I'm not explaining my question?
No, you have to explain it.
Perfectly fine, Sonny. I was just wanting to make it clear for this round. We've been round once. One more round, that's it. Then we'll get on to statements.
Yeah, you made me forget my questions. So, in regards to the competition, so what we're hearing is that there's a correlation between Gambusia and trout that allows the June lake collectors to flourish, or to I know increase in numbers, survive. But will that ever stop the increase in numbers and competition for food? If the predation is only based on June lake collections. So my question is 2 questions. The competition for food is too great. It's almost like a prehistorical way of the Gambusia are nipping out the adults so that there's no survival of the species. It actually seems like that. You know, because all you talk about the ones that are nipped out are adults. Maybe it's because they're the only ones they can catch. I don't know. But the reality is that the adult population, based on, even though the baseline data, even though the control data is probably not very reliable in regards to the spotlighting method. Will there always be an increase, or will there be like bacteria, there'll be a point where they come to a certain level and they come back down again because they die off, whereas the trout will remain consistent if they put in certain numbers? I know that sounds like a triple-ated question, but it's actually not. It's still based on the competition for kai, for food, for survival.
Yeah, so it's Gambusia won't be just having one effect, they'll be having lots of effects. So both competition, eating, nipping the adults if they can, and potentially eating larvae and or eggs. So they could be doing all of those things or part of those things. So I don't think it's and in terms of how the trout interact with that, it relies on trout being there at the same time, and there's all sorts of behavioural things that go on. So I think it's a very complex thing to be able to say establish a causal effect. I heard people talk about causal effect before, and I'd be surprised anybody could say there was a cause and a causal effect in this data that we've got, all this ecology. Yeah, sorry, I don't know.
So my next question would be, if you were to put trout in an environment where there's only Gambusia and other species, but not June lake collectors, would they be forced to feed on Gambusia?
Yeah, I mean, if they could, yeah. The fact that they've got opportunities to do that in the Kaiwi Lakes, and we haven't found any evidence suggests that it's they're difficult. They are difficult. I mean, Gambusia aren't eaten by many things. They're actually really hard to catch and eat. So, I think I would be surprised. I mean, if they could back them up, if you had a small enough tank or pond and there were enough trout, then they would end up just getting some gambusia, but it would, it'd be hard. It's hard. Yeah, sorry. At the end of my knowledge, I'll be on it.
So game and fish should be training their trout to eat gambusia. It might sound stupid, but it's not that stupid, is it? Because they have a taste for the DLG and in numbers, you know, one trout a day, one DLG a day. You do your math. It's not very hard to fathom the decline in numbers.
Thank you, Sonny.
We'll get statements shortly. Peter.
Thank you. My first question is, do you believe that the critical numbers of inanga and the decline is attributable to the historic presence of trout, and that the inanga are still recovering and will need years to recover from this?
I think what's impacting June Lake Galaxius and the Kauri Lakes are multiple things. Gambusia trout, low lake levels, the change in the plant community, the change in the water quality, temperature. Most of our native species like cooler water, so I wouldn't lay the I certainly wouldn't say that DLGs were recovering in any manner. So yeah, sorry, yeah, I can't be any more conclusive than that.
Sorry, so just to clarify your answer, you're saying that there's a number of contributing factors, most of which you described are things that fall outside of our control, but one of the factors is something that's unnatural that we're asking to introduce into the lake, that doesn't have any life cycle. So you would agree that one of the factors that we can control in the decline is trout.
Numbers of trout. Yeah, numbers of trout. Yep, that's one of the few things levers you can pull. Yeah.
Second question, given the Lake Ngatu example that we discussed, Gambusia and inanga can live harmoniously with one another in the same habitat. Can you explain to me from the department's perspective, so we've heard Fish and Game's perspective, why there is a view that trout have any bearing on our native taonga species, their management and their survival, and what relevance the presence of trout has to our native inanga?
So the Ngatu experience, again, as I said before, we have to be very careful extrapolating from one lake to another without knowing the lake well. So it cuts both ways. Yeah, I mean, if there's, I agree. Yes, not sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm not actually. I was going to look it up. I think they're actually dwarf inanga. Dwarf inanga rather than June Lake Galaxius. So June Lake Galaxius.
They have a whakapapa connection to one another.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, one's the taonga. Yeah, so yeah, I mean, it's this. I'm not saying it's not relevant. I'm saying it's there is a whakapapa there. There is a carry on.
Sorry, so just to clarify, so my question was, so based on the Ngatu example, can you explain to me from the department's perspective why there is a view that trout has any bearing on our native taonga species and their management and their survival, and what relevance the presence of trout even has to that? So in a nutshell, why are we even considering trout as a management mechanism for our taonga species, and the consideration of other management tools for Gambusia that are natural within the environment? So I don't know, riparian planting or something else, as opposed to such an extreme measure.
The department, well, as far as I know, has never advocated for trout releases into the Kaiwi lakes. So my point, the previous point, is something that you could stop it as a management action, but that certainly wouldn't say that the department would support trout release.
And just finally, so in terms of the hierarchy, so would it be fair to say that inanga, their protection, preservation, and I'm pulling the words from Te Tiriti o Waitangi, is more important than the introduction of an unnatural species to manage the effects of something that we don't even know corresponds to the decline in the taonga species?
Yes, and that's also consistent with the Conservation Act, under which the department, there's a hierarchy there that places Indigenous species over top of introduced.
So there's an obligation to put that at the forefront of our decision making.
Well, that's the Conservation Act is the mandate that the department's been given. I think the governance group has, yeah. Anyway, I don't want to say what you are or aren't mandated to do. That's your call.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I just have one question, Dave. My last is, if things follow on the course that they are now, and trout are not reintroduced, how much more will we know about that relationship between those two exotic pest species and the Galaxis species in 5 years' time?
Without some investment in some quite detailed ecology and quite tricky, because there's behaviour included as well. I don't think you'll be any further ahead. Yeah.
Good. Thank you. I sort of anticipated that. Just wanted clarification. Any further question?
Yeah, it's kind of a unresolved situation for everybody that I can see here. But despite the fact that Doc recommends not putting trout back in the lake, and we're already, despite their absence, seeing the decline of the species, have you got a clear management plan that you have considered to either maintain or help the species recover?
So there are, it's a dwarf inanga and June Lake Galaxias recovery plan, so which is there, and they actually, under that, they did some actions to translocate June Lake Galaxias into Te Rū Lake, which is in down by the Waipawa. So unfortunately, we haven't gone back and checked to see whether that was successful. So that's the contingency plan, or one of the contingency plans. And Snow, I see Snow's in the room, also said we need to go and check a couple more lakes as well to make sure that there aren't actually June Lakes Galaxias in those. So there's, yeah, I think that's if they're, yeah, that would be what I'd say. Yeah.
So at this stage, you want to persist with the status quo. Your fallback position is that if the June Lake Galaxis becomes extinct in the lake, you would consider, although it's undecided that you can actually make this happen, that you would consider relocating from other lakes back into the lake. So if you put trout in there now, and the species does one or the other, which is what will happen, it will either maintain a population or increase or continue to decline. Either way, you still have an option, perhaps, of relocating fish back into the lake.
That was a question?
Yep, I'm asking, would you still have an option either way?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, there's, I think there's other, well, we need to confirm the numbers. I suppose we wouldn't want to rob Peter to pay Paul by taking too many out of the other lakes that have been translocated too. but yeah, yeah, I would be wary of putting it in with the same numbers of gambusia. And we have talked about methods to control gambusia, not eradicate. I think the rotenone that Craig talked about is an eradication tool. Or you could use it as a control tool as well, but we haven't really done that. But you can do, there are bottle traps that you can set up for gambusia that you'd need hundreds of them and you'd need to use them consistently, but you could reduce the numbers by the same way that we trap predators out of forests. But just we haven't done that. So anyway, but there are options you could explore.
Yeah, Rachel.
Yeah, my question was kind of around what Craig had just said to and asked about. If trout weren't released, what management plan to control gambusia would be put in place? And obviously it'd be fairly important to, that would be something that you would look at going forward.
If we had the resources, and I think local buy-in as well. I think it requires somebody who can put a person on the ground and clear those traps regularly and make sure that we aren't actually capturing any June lake galaxias. But yeah, I think there's need a intensive commitment from the community.
And also, do you see any benefit in releasing trout into Lake Kaiwi with the explosion of gambusia in there to actually monitor the relationship if they were just both in one lake? I think it was asked for back in 2021.
Yeah. It's a very different lake. And we haven't necessarily been monitoring or looking for DLGs or anything in it. So the state of knowledge is very unclear. So I'm sort of, I'd be even more reluctant because to make it worthwhile, you need that baseline data. You need an understanding of the system, and it needs to be the same as Taharoa and Waikari, which is it's not. I wouldn't want to dismiss it out of hand, but it's certainly it would look at to be hard to make it useful. That was my answer.
Thank you. Rick, you have a question or two?
I'd like to make a short statement.
We'll get the statements.
Question. How is the relationship with the tuna and the trout?
There doesn't seem to be many tuna in the lakes, well, not as many as there used to be, so I'm not sure, and it's something we've not necessarily done a decent trapping of for tuna. But tuna predate on trout. Trout will eat alvars as well, but big tuna are the top predator, so big longfins. So it's hard with the pelagic fish like rainbow trout. So whether or not the two, how good a predator tuna are in lakes, they'll be a lot better predator in rivers than lakes. But they're certainly capable of eating trout.
Ash, did you have a last question?
Oh, I just wanted to make a statement when ready. Thank you.
Coming to statements. If you have,
no questions. Sorry, Mark. I had so many questions asked by other people. I don't think there's any room, and we are over the time anyway.
Okay,
so
good.
I have no more questions. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Okay. Fine. Well, bring that to a conclusion. So thank you very much for your contribution today. Now, I'm actually just going to poll the members and see if anyone needs a short break before we move to the conclusion of this meeting. Do we need 5 minutes? Yeah, because there is a technique to closing that door, which not everybody seems to have grasped. So
can I leave the meeting, Chair?
If you wish, yes. Thanks very much for your time.
Okay, thanks. You're welcome. Back here, Dave.
Anyone need a toilet break? Okay, we'll take 5 minutes. Thank you. Now, have arrived at the point where we're going to make speeches, and before that, we will need a motion to speak to. However, my introductory comments are that firstly, the decision to be made is in the form of a recommendation to Taharoa District Council. So it's not the final decision. And the other thing I would advise is that because of my advanced years, I remember back to the days of black and white television and seeing an interview of a retired British politician on a chat show. And he was asked what the critical characteristic of a successful politician was. And after thinking for a moment, he said, it's being able to make good decisions without all the information. Now, I think we're going to put that to the test today because we don't have a complete answer, whichever way you look at it, but we do have to make a decision. So I will seek a motion from the floor.
I move a motion that we recommend council decline the request for the release of trout as per the request to Northland Fish and Game in the letter dated 28 March 2023.
So that's the second of the options in the order paper. Is there a second for that motion? Second, Rick? Okay, so now we have a motion on the table. You each have the opportunity to speak to the motion, and firstly the mover followed by the seconder, and then a time limit, which I'll be able to keep a time limit of 5 minutes to your speech. The mover will have the opportunity to speak and reply at the end. So starting up, mover, please.
Yes, thank you through the chair. So this is only my second meeting of the Taharoa Domain Governance Committee. Myself and other councillors whose first triennium it is are quite disadvantaged in that this is a long-standing issue. It has been going on now for a number of years since the decision to stop trout being continually introduced into the lake occurred. And so we're here today again to consider whether we release them or not. We've heard from Fish and Game, who obviously have, the interest of introducing trout for the various economic reasons and, of recreation, things like, increased tourism and all the good stuff that goes with it, and the ability and the historic experiences to date that no doubt will be part of why Fish and Game, want that legacy to continue. We've also heard on a limited basis from the Department of Conservation. It's also very clear that Department of Conservation have taken a very limited position in this, probably obviously due to the economic constraints and the major data collection, the major technical expertise and advice, the collaborative efforts of different and various stakeholders and different competing positions and interests, which would make it hugely burdensome and also, very costly to our ratepayers. So we've also, what's also very clear to us, and all parties can agree, is that we just don't know. We don't know about the correlation. We're hazarding guesses, we're assuming, we're talking about anecdotal evidence, which isn't evidence at all. There's a huge lack of input from tangata whenua, mana whenua that have been here since time immemorial. Mātauranga Māori, which is scientific evidence. So we talk a lot about scientific evidence, but we're lacking the most sustained evidence and knowledge of Taharoa, which is Te Roro and Te Kuihi, our hapu here. I find it very irritating, which I do apologise for my outburst there, because I found it irritating that we're sitting here receiving expert evidence from a person who's not sitting there in their capacity as an independent expert. He's sitting there on behalf of fishing and game with a very limited interest in that. And I would hate for our members to have taken any of that as information or evidence that would have informed their opinions here today. But as I say, there is an agreement that there is a lack of data, there's a lack of correlation. There's also a lack of any sort of direction as to where we go and who's responsible and who's paying for that. So I don't agree that we're at a position where we can release trout into the lakes, given the concerning decline and the present state of the lakes right now.
Thank you. The seconder, your 5 minutes.
Just listening to the discussion here today, nothing's changed in the last 10 years so far as the trout. We still don't have full baseline data information. Very interesting listening to Dave this morning and his recommendations. I fully support what he suggested. And I've got no further comment to make. I just against the release of trout.
Okay, thank you for that, Rick. Is there anyone else would like to speak to the motion? I see you got your hand up. Ash, give you a try.
Thank you, Chair. I actually have a question on more like a query from you. So this motion, which is not, shall we have to raise another motion, or can we just decline this motion, or just a query for that? So two options we have, whether to introduce or not introduce, right? So there is a motion on the table to choose one option. Right?
So you're looking for clarification of the process? Well, here's the
yes,
process.
so I'm looking for, if I don't agree with this motion, would I have to introduce another motion, is it?
We have a motion on the floor, which we have to pursue to its end. You cannot submit an amendment to the motion which is directly contrary to the motion on the floor. So we'll see where this one ends up, and if it is unsuccessful, then I will seek another motion from the floor.
Thank you for that. So in terms of questions, I think we have enough clarifications. I can speak about the fact that we have wasted a lot of money already, and we are wasting a lot of money, looking forward to wasting more money just to accommodate an option of saying no to a presenter. ratepayers' money is quite important to me, and we have talked about it. And I would rather live in reality, not virtual reality. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement. Is there someone else wishes to speak to the motion? Oh, Mayor Craig.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. As way of background, I remember reading an article years ago about pests in an area of bush outside Wellington. And they discovered that despite the fact that they had high cat numbers, there was no point in trying to eradicate the cats in isolation because the cats were predominantly predating on the mice and the rats. If the cats were taken out of the equation, the mice and the rats would explode in numbers, and they would start eating a lot more native birds because they were the primary predators on those species. So all I bring that up is to say it's a complex issue we've got here facing us today. And one of the primary questions we've got here today to stop the release of exotic fish by 2018 in the lakes Taharoa and Waikari, but consider releasing trout if native species numbers seem to decline in their absence, which seems to be the case. And also I note that in other lakes where the trout have been removed, the June Lake Galactus remains effectively extinct. So I think listening to Doc today, I think they're one of the disappointing factors in this decision-making process because they have not done the sort of work required to make sound decision-making. Nevertheless, it seems to be their fallback position if the June Lake Galactus becomes extinct is to restock the lake. It seems to me that that's what's happening. They are declining in numbers. By reintroducing the trout, we might be able to establish a balance there that maintains a population of the June Lake Galactus. So on that basis, I won't be voting for the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Someone else wish to speak to the motion?
Yeah, I would like to speak to the motion.
Okay, right. Your 5 minutes.
I actually believe it's a correct motion simply because June Lake Galactus have not been given the opportunity to adapt to their surroundings with all these exotic fish being put in. So, you know, let's go back and play a blame thing. So who was it that introduced them first? Let's go back and do this. Why were they allowed to do that? How were they allowed to do that? Let's put this, and it's left us with a situation that one we can control and the other we can't. But we can have some assistance to control numbers. I don't know. I know that 75% of the trout had DLG in them. And I do know that it breaks down pretty quick within their gut. So if they find 30–40%, and most of the time it will be broken down, but no evidence of the guppies. No evidence of the gambusa within their stomach contents. So they do not prey on them. So the numbers will increase regardless until it reaches a final point. And just to put more in there, exotic at that, it's really not holding with my mana whenua values. And we are mana whenua. And for that simple purpose alone, and based on the evidence that has been touted, has been given, as not reliable. you know, we didn't have a chance and the methods are no good. But it's the cheapest method. It's a method I've used before and they've continued with it right throughout these years, and the theory says a decline. But what of the change in environment without trout? They have two predators to fight, to survive against. You know, it's not fair. It's not fair that this taonga species, the only type of a kind in the world, doesn't get a chance to increase. And that's based on what's been put in that lake. Nothing else. And I'm talking people, I'm talking boats, I'm talking everything. What's been put in that lake now? Are they important enough for you? Because I hear tell that one councillor resigned because he believes that the trout are the saving grace for the inner. Not at all. Give them a chance. Their environment, 50,000 years. And then they get into what? 2023 and bang, there all of a sudden there's a decrease because trout have been taken out. Hogwash. Hogwash. And the only thing I would agree with that trout, they were to be put back in there, was that they only have a lifespan of 5 years. But I disagree that they are non-native. You know, like the pines that were planted around the lakes, they were non-native. What's the best environment to survive in? Your native environment. That is my answer, short and sweet.
Thank you, Sonny. We haven't heard from Rachel.
Yeah, look, being new to this committee, and this is the second meeting that we've had, and this is on the table. I just want to say my concerns are that if we leave it as the status quo and potentially don't look at ruling out certain things, where will we be in the next 2-3 years if there really is a big decline and there could be extinction? I think if there is a way of doing something and managing it well to get some more baseline data, that's really where we're at, is getting more data. How do we do that? It could be a small amount of release of trout to get some data in one of the lakes, perhaps. That's what I was talking about today. I'm just concerned if we don't do anything different, that we lose the species, then that's on us as well. So either way, it's a rock and a hard place, I think. It is declining for whatever reasons, but it's hard to rule out exactly what those reasons are. So my concern is just if we don't do anything, it could be damaging as well.
Thank you. So I get to go last. Yeah. And we put the timer on me too, but I shouldn't use up all my time. Okay. From my perspective, the perspective of the Galaxius is that there are 2 exotic species of pest fish from their perspective. They are, while there's been much talk about that triangle of interaction, in fact, it's part of a much bigger web and much more complex. Possibly a change to one element has potentially unforeseen consequences to other elements. And that's just the dynamic of where we are at. We also heard that while the dock staff have misgivings about the quality of the results they've achieved in their fish numbers monitoring, and so that it's unreliable, but they also indicate that it's better to have that information than not to have it. I think that I would support this motion if we knew there was a cure for Gambusia. And there was indication in one of the reports that potentially there will be through form of genetic modification, which means that the fish are unable to breed and in time would die out. And that would be the time when I think there'd be no justification for having trout in there. But for me, with the limited information available, I see a trend of a decline in population associated with a decline in the trout population, even though it's not fully understood what the relationship is between those two species of pest fish. That my disposition would be to vote against the motion as it stands. So we've all had our. Oh, you want to have your final right of reply?
Okay.
Okay, go.
Thank you. So before I circle back to the reserve management plan, the quoted statement, I want to go to another area of the reserve management plan, and that's the first aim of that, which is titled collaboration, and that's on page 10. The objectives premised on local government and tangata whenua co-governing Kaiwi Lakes and inspiring others to share in its care. The objectives state to have effect co-governance arrangements that reflect the active and equal decision-making of local government and tangata whenua, to develop a family or a whānau of participants who are committed to working with us to optimise the values of Kaiwi Lakes, and to establish opportunities for Kaiwi Lakes to be a source of cultural and environmental education, including through the development of an education facility. Although I may be mana whenua, tangata whenua, a direct descendant of Te Kuihi and Te Roroa, I feel it's a shame that I sit here today as a representative of Kaipara District Council, as one of the 4 members of the meeting today, including Mark, Mayor Craig, Ash and Rachel. 4 sitting here today representing Kaipara District Council, and only 2 mana whenua sitting here representing the people that have been here since time immemorial. I feel that this is a breach of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, of the purpose and the reason for which this committee was established, and flies directly in the face of the reserve management plan. This is a slippery and precarious slope that we find ourselves here today. There are many levers that we can pull as tangata whenua to change the clear breaches occurring here at this meeting today. So I move to the quoted reference, attachment E, to stop the release of exotic fish trout by 2018, which we successfully, our predecessors, agreed to, and that was implemented and actioned. But to consider re-releasing this exotic species if the native species numbers are seen to decline, not just to decline, there's more words to that phrase, to decline in their absence, okay? So to decline in their absence, in my interpretation, means that there is a direct correlation between the removal of trout and the decline in the species. Now, every single person sitting around this table here today agrees, including all of the evidence, the people that have sat here today and spoken to us agree that they don't know whether there's a direct correlation between the trout's removal and the decline. So why the hell would we put an exotic species that we all know as well as fact, raise and eats on our native taonga species? Why the hell would we put that back into an environment where the native species are declining to further contribute to the decline? That's something that I cannot wrap my head around, and I cannot, in good conscience, my manawa as well, I cannot in good conscience agree. I just want to leave on the note that there are a number of levers that we as tangata whenua and mana whenua can pull. And one of them is clearly that this is a taonga species. It's ultimately a decision for Northern Regional Council and Department of Conservation, predicated on the fact that that is a government department that has an obligation to honour Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and inanga are a native taonga species that are to be actively promoted and protected. And I do not agree that we sit here today without the data and the information available with our taonga species existence at threat and make a decision here on the table on behalf of a local government authority, when I can guarantee that not all of these people making this decision today have read the reserve management plan. I can almost guarantee it, that you haven't all read it. So that's all I'm going to say for now. Thank you.
Because we're over time.
Okay. The seconder doesn't get a second crack. So I'll now put this motion to the vote, and I'll record it by division so that there's no ambiguity as to what the final vote is. Now, for those newcomers to the process, that means that you will be each asked in turn to declare your vote either aye or nay, or yes or no. So the question is, I'll read the motion, and then I'll request each of you for your decision. So the motion is that the that the committee recommends to council that, that the Taharoa Domain Governance Committee recommends council decline the request for the release of trout as per the request by Northland Fish and Game Council in their letter dated 28th of March 2023. Also, all those in favour, say aye. Put your hand up. 2, 3. I didn't. Okay. Those against, say aye, or raise your hand. And Ash, I didn't see your. Okay, I'm calling a division, so we'll just get to record each of the votes. So I'll leave that to you.
Mayor Jepson.
Against. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Councillor Vincent.
Against.
Councillor Nair.
Against.
Sunny. Sunny, sorry.
For the motion?
Councillor Peniora.
Or
Rick.
For the motion, and I can count. It says 4-3. We need to continue. It's a waste of bloody time.
Councillor Williams.
Not co-governance, then.
don't worry, we'll sort it.
Okay, so I'll declare that the motion failed, which then I will seek a further motion from the floor. Okay, Ash.
So would fair trial at a management
Through the chair.
Right, Tracy, you've come on screen.
I have, through the chair, governance advisor. When the motion is lost, there is no further action and it moves to the next item. if no resolution is reached, the chairperson may accept a new motion to progress the matter, but there was a resolution in this matter. There was unresolved. Is that how you're interpreting that, Mr. Chair, or do you have another thought?
I interpret it as,
Oh, sorry, to interrupt.
I take it that the motion failed, therefore it is open to us to contemplate a further motion.
This meeting's already an hour over time.
Yeah.
And
Thank
the
you for
motion.
clarification.
So, am I correct in that interpretation?
Can we check the standing orders?
Sure, just checking.
This is an extraordinary meeting as well, so.
Okay, well, it's. Thank you. I can't think why that would be. If so, it seems I have advice then that if the motion's been lost, then that completes the business on the agenda, and we'll report back to the council accordingly.
And why didn't you just have? And
Through the chair, I did ask this clarification during the meeting, and I was advised by the chair that I will be able to put another motion. And
that was what I thought the case would be. However, I'm advised that because all of the members have spoken to that motion, then they are precluded from proposing an alternative motion, I think. Is that what you're suggesting? And I mean, but no, it's not. We're not looking at an amendment. I'm looking at a fresh motion from the floor.
Time.
Bear with me. If I could call up Tracy Dean again.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just going to seek some clarification if you don't mind holding.
We have taken a long time over this, and there's been a great airing of views.
Or the chief executive must give notice in writing of the time and place of an extraordinary meeting for understanding order 8.3, as well as the general nature of business to be considered to each member of the council at least 3 working days before the day appointed for the meeting. If the meeting is called by a resolution, which it was, then notice must be provided within such lesser period as is specified in the resolution, as long as it is not less than 24 hours. So we've had the resolution and it failed and it's been lost. So it would then have to be a new resolution given and notice given.
No, I don't think that relates to the situation we're in.
Oh, it's extraordinary meetings.
Yeah, I'm reading that.
An extraordinary meeting may be called by resolution of the council.
I don't think that's the resolution that's referring to.
Chair, Mr. Councillor Vincent, I have just clarified that you can call for another motion to get a resolution in the matter.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, well, that being the case, I'll call for an alternative motion.
Thank you.
Well, I think Ash was first. Ash, you said you wanted to make a motion. So what is your motion?
Yes. My motion is the second option. And you can choose my words, but essentially I would like to give the fair trial to introduction of trout as on a manageable limited basis. And I can say trouts are not sharks. They can be managed and they don't breed. So we are not going into in a situation of possums or whatever is which cannot be managed.
Circle that round a bit, Ash. Would you be happy with the alternative recommendation which is in the agenda, which says that the Taharoa Domain Governance Committee recommends Council approve the request for the release of trout as per the request by the Northern Fish and Game Council in their letter dated 28th March 2023?
Can you just add, through the chair, just add the word on a managed basis, in managed numbers? You know, there's no mention of those numbers. So it has to be limited or managed number. Yeah.
Okay,
basis.
so if we put the words then, I'm just trying to expedite things, put the words that you've requested, so approve the request for the release of trout, then put your words in on a managed basis as per the request by Northern Fish. Okay?
Thank you.
So that is your motion?
Yes.
Is there a seconder?
I'll second that.
Seconded, Mayor Craig.
Just
We'll have a quorum.
Okay, I just wanted to check what's on.
Quorum's 3, so plus the mayor. So. Okay, so Ash, you can speak to your motion now.
Okay. So what we have heard today, if I get it right, is we are into a situation of confusion in terms of research. I would not like to waste ratepayers' money on further research, as is suggested in the previous motion. We also learned that we are living in a dynamic ecosystem, so we are just putting our head against the wall, trying to unravel nature. Now, as I mentioned, trouts are not sharks. They can be managed. They're not going to eat. And we decide the quantity. They don't breed. We know very well. And I guess as a council, we are dedicated to, and we have a vision to improve Kaipara in terms of tourism, in terms of economic. I would like my Moka Puna to know what is trout when they go to see Kaiwi lakes, and maybe sometime catch them later on. I think the research is inconclusive, has been told by the researchers themselves, and I would rather have a real experience than virtual experience trying on database systems. So yes, my motion is that we should go for as clarified earlier, and I would love the support of all councillors. Thank you.
Thank you. Seconder.
Yeah, I also share the concerns regards the nature of a native species, and we're trying to make the right decision here for that species. I believe it's not going to be clear cut, whichever decision we make today. But I think we're making the one that gives the species the most likely chance to recoup, particularly with the dominance of the gambusia. And I'd like to remind everybody that the trout is the one species that we can control amongst these species. So it's particularly with the number that are introduced, the ability to I think we need to have very clear monitoring of that process, and based on that monitoring, we can establish whether they are helpful with the interrelation that goes between all these species, or whether they're not, and therefore we still have the ability to control them. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak to the motion?
So I talked about a number of levers that can be pulled. One that's this decision that the committee are going to be making today isn't the be all and end all. So the Kaipara District Council was only one small cog in the wheel. And that it's, ultimately for people like Department of Conservation, who have already indicated that they're not in support of trout at this present time, especially with the lack of data. So there is the ability there for this decision to not go ahead. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak to the motion? Probably pretty well talked out, but thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, look, I agree that this isn't the end result. It's basically getting it council, and perhaps there can be more amendments and more talking through what could possibly happen. And we could have other stakeholders in quite a robust thinking about so that's why I support it to council at this stage in the hope that we can have other options.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak to it?
Read the motion back, please. All the motions.
To the full governing body to introduce trout back in.
I'll ask our clerk to read the motion.
Oh, sure. That the Taharoa Domain Governance Committee recommends council approve the request for the release of trout on a managed basis as per the request by the Northland Fish and Game Council in their letter dated 28th March 2023.
So you see it's a slight alteration to the motion or the recommendation is put in the agenda. Did you wish to speak to that motion? Okay. Yeah, okay, I think we've come to the point of a vote. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those against, vote no. 1, 2, 3. I think for sake of completeness, I will call a division on that as well for the record. So will you each in turn respond to the governance person?
Mayor Jepson.
For the motion.
Vincent.
4.
Councillor Nair.
4.
Danny.
I was again.
Councillor Peniora.
Again.
Rick.
Against.
Councillor
Okay.
Williams.
So that means it's the motion is passed 4 votes to 3. Okay. So that brings us to the end of our business for this meeting. I'm going to get someone to help bring it home, but I just advise members that we've got someone in the audience who wishes to convey some important urgent information, which is not part of the meeting, but if we could just stay on as soon as we concluded. So I'll invite someone to give us a closing karakia. Peter opened us this morning.
Ato e tupere ana ngāka kato ke koe. Kore hoki ngaro ia koe tino ka hange I hotu wairi o tapu hei haka mai ngā whakaaro o mātou ngāka. E tino aro hawaii mātou ke koe. Kia tika ai te haka nui I tō ingo a tapu koe kura ti nei hoki koe.
Thank you. So, meeting's just closed. I'll invite Snow if you want to just step up and we'll sit. So if we, is this going live out to the world or?
We need to stop the recording.
Tōrong tātou, te look